The memo had been circulated 3 times before High Commander Joe finally signed it. It read, in its entirety, effective immediately, Academy Training Block Delta 7 will be suspended between the hours of 1300 hours and 1430, station time. All personnel are to maintain noise discipline in corridors 9 through 12. This order supersedes all prior scheduling protocols and is non-negotiable. The reason was not listed. The reason didn't need to be listed. Everyone already knew. It had started 2 years ago, when the Galactic Interspecies Academy accepted its first cohort of Varek cubs into the caretaker program. The Varek were predators. Not metaphorically, not in the aggressive negotiator, takes no prisoner's corporate sense that the humans had invented to make themselves feel dangerous at dinner parties. The Varek were actually predators. 6-limbed. Bioluminescent spines. A jaw structure capable of exerting pressure that could shear through reinforced hull plating. They communicated partially through subsonic frequencies that made the internal organs of smaller species feel vaguely wrong. The Academy had accepted the cubs as a gesture of interspecies diplomacy. Everyone had been very proud of themselves. Then the diplomats left, and the educators were left with 11 Varek cubs aged 3 to 7 solar years, and absolutely no idea what to do. Me New York, the Academy's Director of Cross-Species Integration, a title that had been invented for the occasion and would likely be dissolved once the situation resolved itself, spent the first week reading every available Varek behavioral study. She flagged 17 contradictions, 9 gaps in the data, and 1 study that had clearly been conducted by someone who had never actually met a Varek. The cubs, meanwhile, had dismantled 2 observation consoles, bitten a structural support beam, non-critically, and refused all offered food. They were not aggressive. They were, and this was the word Me New York used in her first report, inconsolable. They did not cry the way human children cried. They made no sound at all. They simply folded in on themselves, spines dim, eyes tracking movement in the corridors with something that looked exhaustingly like hope, and then going dim again when the movement passed. They're waiting for something, Me New York told Joe during their second debrief. Or someone. Joe, who had 17 other crises on her desk, said, "Find out what," and went back to the budget review. What Me New York found was Mara Ellison. Mara was not a xenobiologist. She was not a diplomat, a linguist, or a behavioral specialist. She was a maintenance worker, specifically, the human responsible for the upkeep of the habitat units in Block Delta, which now housed the Varek cubs. She was 43 years old, had a voice like gravel warmed by sun, and had apparently been sitting on the floor of Habitat 7 every evening after her shift, eating her dinner and talking to no one in particular. She talked about her day. About the conduit she'd repaired in Corridor 4. About the smell of the filtration system when it needed recalibration. About a bird she'd seen once, on Earth, that had built its nest in the engine compartment of a grounded transport and raised 3 chicks before anyone noticed. She did not try to make eye contact with the cubs. She did not offer food or reach toward them. She just sat there, solid and warm and present, talking in that low unhurried voice while she ate her meal. On the 5th night, Kale Vera sat down next to her. Kale was the eldest cub and, by Varek social structure, functionally their leader, or at least their bellwether. Where Kale went, the others followed. Where Kale refused to go, no amount of diplomatic pressure could move them. The Academy psychologists had been trying to reach Kale for a week. They had offered enrichment activities, dietary supplements, holographic environments modeled on the Varek homeworld. Kale had ignored all of it. But Kale sat down next to Mara Ellison while she ate her dinner, and pressed one heavy 6-limbed shoulder against her side, and stayed there for 40 minutes without moving. Mara finished her meal, said, "Same time tomorrow, then," and went home. By the end of the first month, the cubs were eating. By the end of the second, they were sleeping, actual sleep, not the half-dormant vigilance state they'd been maintaining, which the Academy physicians had quietly told Joe was unsustainable and would eventually cause permanent neurological damage. By the end of the third, Kale Vera had started following Mara on her maintenance rounds. This was not a small thing. Kale was the size of a large earth dog and moved with the specific kind of quiet that made people instinctively check whether their exits were clear. The first time Kale padded into the corridor 4 maintenance bay behind Mara, the 2 engineers already inside left so fast one of them forgot his tools. Mara handed the tools back when she saw them in the corridor, said he won't bother you if you don't startle him, and went back to work. Dai Hai, the Academy's head of security, filed 3 incident reports in the first week. Joe read them, looked out her office window at the security feed showing Mara Ellison on her back under a junction panel with Kale Vera lying across her feet like a very large, heavily armed cat, and archived the reports without response. The nap time protocol emerged organically, which was perhaps the strangest part. No one had planned it. Mara had not requested it. It had simply become apparent, over the course of several weeks, that the Cubs' afternoon rest period coincided exactly with Mara's lunch break, and that on days when noise from the training blocks woke them early, they spent the rest of the day dim-spined and difficult, and that on days when they woke on their own schedule they were, by every available metric, doing better. Wiyus, the Academy's scheduling coordinator, a Pelthari with 17 years of experience building training timetables for a 12-species institution, had rescheduled an entire training block without being asked, and then sent the memo to Joe with a subject line that read simply, obvious. Joe had signed it. The xenobiologists came eventually, as xenobiologists do. They had papers to write, theories to propose, frameworks to construct. They used words like surrogate attachment, interspecies trust formation, and inadvertent behavioral conditioning. Mara, when one of them asked her to explain her methodology, looked at him for a long moment and said, "I just ate my dinner where they could see me." The xenobiologist wrote this down and later published a 40-page paper on what he called the Ellison Protocol. Mara read it when someone forwarded it to her, said "huh," and went to go see why Kale was making that particular low sound that meant one of the younger cubs had gotten into something they shouldn't have. KRNY, the youngest of the 11 cubs, had somehow gotten onto the roof of the water reclamation unit and appeared extremely pleased with themselves. Mara stood below with her arms crossed, doing nothing except existing in that solid, reliable way of hers, until Kale said something subsonic and KRNY climbed back down. "Good," Mara said, to both of them, and meant it the same way. 2 years in, the Academy sent a formal update to the Varric homeworld. "The cubs are thriving," the report said. "They are developing on schedule, exceeding social integration benchmarks, and demonstrating cognitive and emotional growth consistent with healthy youth development. Cross-species relationships have been established. Trust protocols are functioning." What the report did not say, because there was no official field for it, was that every morning, 11 Varric cubs woke up and immediately went to find Mara Ellison. That Kale Vera had, unprompted, begun sleeping across the doorway of whatever room Mara was working in the specific way that Varric used to guard things they had decided were theirs to protect. That on the one occasion Mara had taken a sick day, the cubs had sat in the corridor outside her quarters for 6 hours, patient and still, spines low, waiting. That the Academy, the Galactic Interspecies Academy with its 17 departments and its 11 species staff and its 400-year institutional history, had rearranged its schedule around one human woman's lunch break. Not because she'd asked. Not because she'd done anything remarkable. But because she had sat down on a floor and talked about her day, and meant it, and kept showing up, and that, apparently, was something even the children of apex predators needed badly enough to reorganize a universe around. Joe, signing the weekly status report, paused on the line about the training schedule. She thought about Mara Ellison, eating her dinner on a floor somewhere in Block Delta, with 11 sets of bioluminescent eyes watching her from the shadows. She thought about Kale Vera, choosing a doorway. She checked resolved and moved on to the next item. Some things don't require a framework. They just require someone who keeps showing up.